the day after Slab's birthday. I'm sure there's nothing to do with it, but coincidence. It was 27th of August 79, played host to the biggest loss of life for the British Army during this conflict.
So sometimes it's called Warren Point, which is the nearest town. I always call it Narrow Water because that's kind of the more precise geographical kind of point. Um, but yeah, so I believe the largest number of British Army killed in the Troubles, 18.
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was.
Yeah. So and most of them from the parachute regiment.
I was going to say that
Um,
that would mean more. That would mean more to a Republic anyway.
yeah, obviously Bloody Sunday. Um, although I think the operation was originally conceived to kill Royal Marines, but they're all sort of targets. But yeah, so basically that operation was extremely sort of sophisticated and clever, and also lucky, I guess, or unlucky depending on which way you view it. But right by Narrowwater Castle, which is like this Elizabethan like little castle, very beautiful spot. Although apparently they're going to put a bridge over the Cooley Peninsula, and I saw some drawings of the bridge. It just looks absolutely horrendous. I don't know why you would need to put a bridge on in such a beautiful place when you could just drive around. Anyway, um, but the border, runs through the between the County Down and the Republic, um, runs through uh, Carlingford Lock, it's called, um, separating County Down from the Cooley Peninsula. And so, what the IRA had realized, because they'd done another attack there before with a bomb at Narrowwater Castle, is that logically, in terms of British British Army sort of tactics and procedures and whatever, that the incident control point would be at this gatehouse, which was just a couple hundred yards away. And so what they did was, Brennan Burns and Joseph Brennan, who were the two IRA men, they were on the other side of the lock in the Irish Republic. They were on the button, and so they used like there was an old tower. They used that as the point at which to line up, and so there were a bunch of British Army vehicles with paratroopers in them, and they were driving uh, along that road. And so when I think the last vehicle, or maybe it was just before the last vehicle, kind of crossed the line of sight to the tower, um, Burns pushed a button, and this trailer, which was loaded with hay, which was right by the castle, just exploded, and I think six paratroopers were killed in the last vehicle, which contained eight paratroopers. And I interviewed one of them, a guy called Tom Cockey, who survived terrible burns, 35% burns, and he sort of described it just absolutely kind of um, horrific. Um, and so Burns and Brennan, they armed a second bomb. So there was a second bomb at the gatehouse, which was the incident they kind of calculated was almost certainly be the incident control point. And so they used it was called a memo park timer. So for like in the old days of before iPhones, tell you when your parking was expired. So it was like a timing device. And again, the IRA and particularly South Armagh was very good at improvising, um, using kind of common technology to use improvised devices. And so they armed this bomb and they set it for 30 minutes. And it worked from the IRA point of view to sort of perfection because the incident control point was set up. You had helicopters flying in. You had Lieutenant Colonel David Blair, who was the commanding officer, the Queen's Own Hussars, I think, who landed there. There was a major called Fursman from the parachute regiment. They were all there, and inside that gatehouse, they packed into milk churns all these explosives, an even bigger bomb, and so that detonated 30 minutes later, kind of when the the British Army was kind of, you know, getting, taking control of the incident, evacuating. Like a Lynx, so Tom Cockey was in a Lynx which had just taken off, and then the gatehouse explodes and kills 12 more soldiers. And Tom Cockey, I remember, I mean, I interviewed him in Belfast, and it was a very emotional interview. And he's in terrible pain. He knows that a bunch of his mates have just been killed, and the explosion is so strong that like the tail of the lynx is kind of buffeted in the air as he's being flown off to hospital, and just absolute carnage. Heads in the lock and bits of flesh on the trees, and just horrendous sort of scene. That's what happens when bombs go off. But from the IRA point of view, um, I mean, actually, Tom Cockey mentioned to me the graffiti in Newry, and I'm sure elsewhere. We got 18 and Mountbatten. Now, the reference to Mountbatten is that over on the other side of the country, Mountbatten was killed, which was also a South Armagh operation that day. So, for the South Armagh IRA, it really, if they weren't on the map already, it really sort of put them on the map, and particularly Tom Murphy as I mean, I think he was British, identify him as sort of an intelligence officer, but I don't know exactly what position he had, but certainly he was a top commander in South Armagh by that point, and I think that's one of the things that led him to becoming the IRA chief of staff eventually.
Yeah, like you said, two bombs half an hour apart. They were both around 800 pounders, but both fertilizer, I believe. From
Yeah,
that first one, I think I read that one of them killed in the first one. One of that six, literally the only thing that was left of him, I think, was his pelvis, and it was like welded, essentially, like melted into the seat from the strength of the bomb. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like you mentioned, they nearly got a bonus. They nearly took out a helicopter, kind of by mistake too. This demonstrates as well. It demonstrates that they were an adaptable and like a good learning unit. They kind of detected their patterns. They figured where they would put this kind of incident control point. Um, this all, yeah, this speaks to even the locals. Actually, it was well known that like after a while the locals, because there's only so many places you can put covert observation posts and places to hide and ambush. The locals know the roads and the bends and everything way better
yeah,
than you. So yeah, it would get to the stage where locals could almost kind of think like the military. They would you mentioned the book that like often farmers would go down kind of beating their hedges with sticks, and if they saw soldiers, they wouldn't let on anything. They pretend like they didn't, and they go reporting it. So yeah,
yeah.
the whole
Or
the
just the way like the cattle, again, if you're like a farming person, just the way the cattle might move in the field, because if there's an observation post with a couple of SAS guys sort of in there, the cattle will sort of move away. Just that kind of intuitive stuff. And then, of course, with the British Army, they're coming in for 6-month tours or 9-month tours, and it's just this, you know, cir circulation thing all the time. And so they're having to learn everything almost from nothing, in a 6 or a 9-month tour. And I saw it in Afghanistan, where there was 6-month tours, and it was kind of in a way disastrous for the British because that meant the first month is sort of handing over, you know, from the previous unit, and then the next month is just kind of learning the ropes. Then you maybe have 3 months where you're kind of operating at sort of full effectiveness, and then the last month you're preparing to hand over again, and also again, soldiers are human; they don't want to take risks in that last month, so a lot of stuff doesn't really happen in that last month, and that was a sort of the cycle in South Armagh, and um, so this unit, the IRA had seen where the incident control point would be if you set off a bomb at narrow water. Now, if you'd had continuity with the British Army, now they learned this, and they would have continuity officers based in the brigade headquarters who might serve 2 or even 3 year tours who would try and liaise with the battalion that was coming in. But yeah, if you'd had a continuity, you would have known that there'd been a previous attack there. That's where the incident control point was. So you'd maybe have, I mean, limited possibilities there, but you might have had 2 or 3 different places where there might be an incident control point, and then maybe you reduce the chances of them being that lucky, by 75%, which is kind of significant.
I can only imagine how terrifying it would be. First of all, to be worried to be sitting in the back of a Saracen or a Jeep or the trucks that the Warren Point the soldiers were caught in. We'd be terrified the thought that you're just sitting there. It's not like you can engage the enemy. You're kind of sitting duck and something explodes and there's nothing you can do. But and then it would be further terror instilled by the fact that like the military has built up these good practical procedures like setting up an instant point. But then you realize, oh shit, they've actually kind of figured out our moves and they're like 2 steps ahead, kind of. I can only imagine how scary it would be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, when you're young, you think about these things a lot less. And, there's a lot of stuff I did when I was young that I maybe wouldn't do now. But yeah, I mean, in Afghanistan, I remember going, accompanying US forces and British forces in Afghanistan. You're walking down a road and you just, the next step you take, you could just be blown to pieces. And the same with vehicles. I mean, I remember getting like a briefing from this US Army sergeant um, in Iraq, and I was going from, I think it was Al Assad base to Baghdad, and the briefing was just freaking terrifying. And I remember just getting into this vehicle and thinking, well, there's nothing I can do really. So I just sat there and I put my hands over my balls basically, and just thought I'm just going to go to sleep, and I hope when I wake up everything's going to be okay, and it was. But sometimes you just have to put your life into the hands of